Greetings. My name is August Orlo, and today I'll be talking to you about focus groups. Additionally, we will be using the work Designing and Conducting Virtual Focus Groups by Casey Sweet as a reference. Before we begin, we'll be looking at, first, what focus groups are. Then, we'll take a peek at what changes focus groups have encountered in recent history. Then, we'll have a few notable studies and examples of how focus groups work and how they don't. And lastly, we'll end it with a small discussion where I'll post some questions for you to discuss with your classmates about how focus groups work and what their uses are in society today. Now, let's start by talking about what focus groups are in essence. Simply stated, focus groups are a research method when a researcher hosts a group of a few participants to learn their personal feedback on various products, services, habits, public issues. You get the idea. Now, in the bottom of your screen, you can see a common focus group taking place. They're meeting in a general public area, and they're actually engaged in conversation. There are three main parts of a focus group, human-wise. You have the first part are the participants, and they are these people right here. They are engaged in discussion about a certain product or lifestyle, like I mentioned above, and while they are having their discussion, they are being moderated by, for the lack of a better word, the moderator, right here. You can see that the moderator is recording what goes on in the discussion and is talking to them and trying to maintain the discourse at the same time. Now, there's another part of the discussion where you have the observers taking place, but we'll get to that in a second. Now, as I've said, the objective of a focus group is to gain insight regarding the choices and behaviors of the participants involved. Now, you're wondering where the observers are. In fact, if you want to find the observers, you have to understand that there is often more in focus groups than meets the eye. The observers are independent of the entire conversation and are looking in on the conversation between the participants and the moderator in order to understand the true feelings in their regards to the product. So, for an example, these observers are also looking at the behaviors of the participants involved in order to try and study their regards and their feelings towards certain subjects. This helps to give a very unbiased look and to help try and eliminate certain senses of bias among the participants, and I'll brush upon that later as well. Now, the participants themselves are usually vetted randomly or individually vetted for a certain reason, such as from a target market trying to find the best connection that they have with the product itself. They can either vary from age, gender, race, ethnicity, economic status, or their relation to the subject, although the last one tends to be very, very important in choosing a participant involved. They have a handful of duties as well. First, they're to provide feedback. Second, they're to engage in the conversation. Third, they connect with both the participants and the moderator. And lastly, but not least, they are to be respectful to both the moderator and the other participants, ensuring that everyone can speak evenly. Now, this is the moderator. Either they're related to the subject directly, or they can be hired separately by the company putting on the experiment. The duties of the moderator include to moderate the discussion by facilitating a peaceful and friendly discussion. They record the participants' responses. They respond to the participants in turn in order to prolong the discussion. And then they also, in some cases, can ask the questions that the observers have already predetermined to be asked. One other thing is that they always deem themselves approachable and easy to talk to. Lastly, they keep the discussion respectful and they relate everything they say to the subject itself in order to avoid tangents. Observers, on the other hand, are the individuals conducting the experiment. The duties of the observers are, but aren't limited to, recording the behaviors of the participants, analyzing the responses, and analyzing the participants themselves based on behaviors. Responsibilities, as I've said, of the participants are to share experiences regarding their subject, engaging the discussion with other participants and the moderator, and to be completely honest about the subject. That's an important one, actually. The moderators, in turn, are asked to connect and empathize with the participants to keep the discussion on track and focused, no pun intended, And the observers, lastly but not least by any means, do not interact with the participants themselves, or otherwise risk jeopardizing the experiment. Now, there have been many changes in focus groups, but to name a couple, Sweet notes that many focus groups are actually now converted to being online operating companies. They're also dealing with potential biases that were unavoidable in other focus groups in the past. Now, Sweet notes that there are two general types of electronic focus groups. The first, being real time, are held concurrently in a chat room. They typically last about 90 minutes, and the participants are given a pre-made set of questions to answer. However, bulletin boards can last well over 5 days, and the participants enter their responses very similar to the fashion that blog posts and forum posts are typically answered in message boards online today. The communication with the moderator and the other participants in both of these is delayed and a bit more difficult. However, new responses in the questions are periodically added for both the moderator and the participants to better the focus group itself. Now, Sweet notes that there are benefits to electronic focus groups almost everywhere, primarily being that they are time manageable, where the participants are able to meet and respond from anywhere. They're also economically beneficial to almost every party in the experiment, as it is much cheaper, both in terms of time and money, for the participant and the moderator to meet online, as opposed to having to take time out of the schedule the individual has and to meet in a certain location and discuss for an hour how they feel about a certain subject. They're beneficial to participants who do not enjoy socializing with other people, and to people who may appear shy at meetings and are not very inclined to give their personal feedback. They also allow the moderator to analyze participants' responses on a much better time frame, because they give them actual time to respond to their questions as opposed to having to do it live. Skype and other VoIP programs have made conference calls incredibly applicable, and transcripts are generally more available and usable for the moderators and the observers to help understand the responses of the participants themselves. Written responses, as well, may contain more than verbal ones given by participants, because someone may forget something to write down when they're speaking it, but they essentially have the chance to write it down and be a bit more clear, especially if someone is harder to understand initially. Now, where there are benefits, though, there are also weaknesses of certain focus groups electronically. The biggest I would like to note is that they're impersonal. Sweet also discusses that it's difficult to communicate over the internet for many individuals, as a different skill set is required for both participants, moderators, and observers. And even though they all may have a certain skill set, certain skill sets around Skype or other types of chat room applications are very, very hard to come by. The response time and the instability of internet calls is also very frustrating for a lot of customers, both on both ends of the spectrum. Participants may be less likely to cooperate when they're not addressed to personally as well. They may feel uncomfortable having to just talk to a computer, and it's very, very hard to socialize and have a discussion via Skype as opposed to having one in person. Also, you have the problem of uncooperative participants. They're more difficult to encourage responses because it's very, very tough to encourage someone to talk to you when you're chatting with them online as opposed to talking to them in person, and to try and make them feel comfortable. One more thing I'd like to add. For the moderator and for the observer, it is very, very hard because most moderators are required to have a certain Guam type capacity of being able to type Sweet argues from any. Now, as well as having the weaknesses I previously stated, there are potential biases that incur. You can have sampling biases, brand loyalty to other products other than the subject, or products related to the subject. You could also these could all lead to dishonest responses. This is also related to the Hawthorne effect as well. The Hawthorne effect is a term referring to the tendency of some people to work harder and perform better when they're participants in an experiment, and they actually change their behavior due to the attention that they are receiving from the researchers rather than because of manipulation of an independent variable. And in layman's terms, it means that a lot of participants will change their answers and essentially provide themselves to be a bit more efficient when they are being observed. Now, I believe it is beneficial to engage the class in a discussion. First and foremost, I have a couple of questions to ask. Firstly, what focus group method do you prefer? Then, I would like to also ask, What separates an electronic focus group moderator from a general focus group moderator? Lastly, what products and/or services or causes would focus groups excel in, and would they struggle with anything else? Once again, I would like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Have a nice day.